Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this wonderful Pesach series via Zoom. It was nice to share with you some thoughts last Thursday night and the Tuesday night before that, and again the Tuesday and Thursday before that one, in which we discussed the entire Seder from beginning to end, and we went in depth into the philosophical and psychological makeup of the four sons. The tonight's subject is going to be about the Matzah. And I'm going to read to you from the Haggadah first. And I suggest that if you have a Haggadah, you should get it now, because we'll be using it a little bit. In the Haggadah, which is the section of Magid, the fifth section of the fifth part of the Seder, where we tell the story of the Exodus. It's after the four questions, and at the end of the Haggadah, we finally give an answer to the children. We finally give an answer to two of the questions. Which two of the questions do we answer? Who knows? We answer the two middle questions. The first question is why we dip twice into the salt water and into maror and the charosas, and then we ask why we eat. That's the first question. Second question is why this night do we eat matzah when all other nights we eat chametz or matzah. Tonight only matzah. The third question is why do we eat the bitter herbs, and the fifth question is the fourth question, that is why we recline on our left side while we eat the matzah and the wine. So those are the four questions, and unbelievably, two of those four questions we do not answer, which is a strange thing in its own right. The two questions that we do answer is the two middle ones, why we eat matzah tonight and why we eat maror tonight. And when do we answer these two questions? All the way at the end of the Haggadah. And this is strange as well, because the kids are tired. They was good enough to ask the four questions. Why don't we answer them right away? A kid asks you a question, you make him wait for 3 hours, for 2 hours, for an hour. But the reality is that we answer these questions only at the end of the Haggadah. And that is literally the second to the last page of the part before we eat the matzah. Over there we say that the three essential things of the Haggadah, of the night of Pesach, are the Paschal offering, to eat the matzah, and to eat the maror. Now, of course, nowadays, we don't need any bitter herbs. We don't need the Paschal offering, because that is, we're not in the Beis Hamikdash, we don't have the temple anymore. But the matzah and the maror we do eat. And it's at that point where we say and answer the child, and we say, this matzah that we eat, why do we eat it? And we answer, because, I'm going to read it to you in English, because the dough of our fathers did not have time to become leavened, that means to rise, before the King of Kings. The Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. What does that mean? Everyone knows what that means. It's the famous reason why we eat the matzah. The reason we eat the matzah is because when the Jewish people went out of Egypt, the great miracle happened, and the Exodus happened very quickly, in haste. The Jews were pushed out of Egypt, so to say, were chased out of Egypt, and they took with them only very few provisions. Among them was this dough that did not even have time to rise to become leavened. And because of that, they had to bake it. They ended up baking it into matzahs, which is unleavened bread. And because of this tremendous miracle, we eat matzah forever, and it became a mitzvah to remember that. And we eat matzah and every night, every Pesach night, to recall and to reflect on the fact that this exodus happened quickly and they didn't have time to rise. And the Haggadah brings for this proof text. And I continue to read from that piece. Thus it is said, they baked matzah cakes from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leavened. This is in the book of Exodus. It very clearly states that they baked their dough into matzah because it didn't have time to leaven, for they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay. And they had also not prepared any other provisions. There's so much packed into this little section here, and I'm going to unpack it for you. And I'm going to teach you tonight the synopsis of a Hasidic discourse of the first Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. And I'll do my best to explain everything precisely in language that we can all appreciate, not only understand, but even relate to. In a nutshell, in this little 5-line piece in the Haggadah, which most of us say it within about 30 seconds, and we move on, we say a couple of things over here. We give the reason why we eat the matzah. The reason we eat the matzah is because when the Jews left Egypt, they left in haste. All they had with them was this dough. They ran out, and they didn't even have time to rise, and therefore they had to bake it into cakes, matzah cakes, and thus we have this matzah every Pesach night. Another important thing that says over here is that they took the last few words, and they had also not prepared any other provisions, and therefore all they were able to eat was these matzah cakes. And to remember that we eat matzah cakes tonight, as the night of Pesach. But in those 5 words, in those few words, was also a very important concept and message that we need to understand and reflect on the night of Pesach, and that is, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they left with nothing. They didn't take any provisions. When you go on a trip from here to Orlando, you pack up a whole trunk full of provisions. You take apples and oranges and sandwiches and drinks and you take and you take and you take, right? And that's just for one trip to Orlando. Imagine the Jewish people left Egypt permanently. They took nothing with them. In other words, what were they thinking? These are 2 million people leaving Egypt at the same time. Out of nowhere, they just pick up and leave with nothing, just a few meager pieces of dough that they didn't have time to even have rise, and they're running out. What are they going to do? These are parents of children. What are they thinking? Not to take any provisions with them. What would they think? Where are they going to eat when they run out of the matzah? How are they going to feed their children? How are they going to feed themselves? What was their thinking process? And in fact, of course, that alone is the entire reason why we eat matzah. And the Zohar calls the matzah of faith, the food of faith. In other words, it was that matzah that represented the unconditional faith that the Jewish people had in God. They left out into the desert, not knowing when they're going to have the next opportunity to buy provisions to feed their families, and yet they just left. Only the matzah. The matzah represents that incredible faith that the Jewish people had in God and in Moses, that somehow it will work out well. And they'd have nothing to worry about tomorrow's breakfast, because it will happen somehow. And it did, of course, as we know. The manna fell, they had provisions for 40 years, miraculously, the miraculous water, the miraculous heavenly food that fell every morning. But if you would ask the Jews when they left, they didn't know they were going to have manna, they didn't know they were going to have all these miracles happen for them. So what it was absolute faith in God. Therefore, the Zohar calls the matzah, the food of faith. Now, by the way, we're going to learn a little bit later in this class how important this concept is, which means that when a Jew, eats matzah on Pesach night, he's not eating physical food. Well, he's eating physical food, obviously. It's a mixture of bread and of flour and water that was quickly baked before it had time to rise and become leaven. But what he's ingesting and what he's eating is something very spiritual, and I want to elaborate on that. But as an introduction to that idea, I want to ask a few questions. And those are, it seems that the Haggadah is telling the child the answer to his question, why we eat matzah tonight. The answer he gives is because when the Jews left Egypt, they ate matzah, they ran out quickly and they didn't have time. The whole story we just mentioned. Here's the question. This seems to indicate that had they not went out in haste, had they gone out of Egypt leisurely, slowly, no rush, everything would be on time, take care, pack your bags, go like a mensch, right? That means that they would have had chametz. If not for that, they would have been able to have, the dough would rise, right? And they would be able to eat chametz. They would have eaten chametz, right? But that is a problem. Here's the problem with that. Problem with that is that we know that God gave the mitzvah to the Jewish people while they were already still in Egypt, to eat matzah and not to eat chametz that day. That means like this. Let me give you the chronology. They're in Egypt. Moses comes to them 2 weeks before the Exodus, and he tells them, listen, there's going to be an Exodus on the 15th of the month. He's talking to them on the 1st of the month, and he says to them on the 10th day of this month, you are to take for yourself a sheep, prepare a paschal lamb, a offering that you're going to bring on the 14th day. That means the day before they leave Egypt. And he clearly tells them that that meat of the sacrifice they have to eat together with the matzah. God gave a mitzvah to eat matzah the night of Pesach before they left Egypt. In Egypt, while they were offering and eating their sacrifice of Pesach, they were eating this together with matzah because God commanded them to eat matzah. And he commanded them not to eat chametz. So what are you telling me that tonight, 3,320 some odd years later, or every year since, the reason we eat the matzah on Pesach, and we told this to our children, which can, child is serious. You got to be honest with your children. You got to be honest with yourself too. We tell our children the reason we eat this matzah is because of this interesting story that happened to the Jewish people, not in the night of when they eat, not the night in the 14th of Nisan when they brought their sacrifice, but that already happened the next day. When did the Jewish people leave Egypt? They left Egypt on the next day. Right? They left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, the day after they ate the paschal offering together with the matzah. That's when the story of the haste and the revelation, and they had to rush out of Egypt, and the dough didn't have to rise, didn't have time to rise. That happened the next morning. But they had already a mitzvah beforehand to eat matzah in Egypt.
Do you have any eggs that we can make hard-boiled eggs?
You understand the question? Why are we saying now that the reason we're eating the matzah is because the Jewish people left Egypt in haste? And if not for that, it would have risen, and it would have been chametz, and so on and so forth. How could you say such a thing? There was a mitzvah of God not to have chametz that whole day. So it had nothing to do with the fact that it didn't have time to rise. Even if it would have time to rise, they wouldn't be allowed to allow it to rise. Just like us today, we have all the time in the world, but when it comes to Pesach, you're not allowed to allow the dough to rise. So that's question number one. Why are we confused there with the reason why we eat the matzah? It would seem more logical that we're eating the matzah because when do we eat the matzah? Here's another important point. When do we eat the matzah? Anyone know? When we eat the matzah the night of Pesach. If you want to eat the matzah at 3 o'clock in the morning, could you do that? No. You know why? You have to eat it before midnight. Not only do you have to eat the first portion of matzah before midnight, you have to finish the whole Seder before midnight, at least the part of all the way till the Afikomen. You have to eat the Afikomen before midnight. And this makes perfect sense. The reason we have to eat it before midnight is because the Jews in Egypt were told to eat their matzah before midnight, together with the Paschal offering, and that had to be eaten before midnight. So it seems clear that the reason we eat matzah today, which we're insistent to eat it before midnight, is a commemoration of the matzah that the Jewish people ate in Egypt before midnight. So why are you telling me that the reason we're eating matzah tonight is because after midnight, the next morning, they ran out of Egypt in haste and there was no time for the dough to rise? The whole thing doesn't make any sense. There's something wrong with everything we're saying here. Two things. First of all, we're eating the matzah because of the same reason the Jews ate the matzah in Egypt. We're both eating it before midnight. It's reflective of the same idea, which is God gave a mitzvah that night to eat the matzah together with the Pesach offering as a preparation before we go out of Egypt. You know why we had to bring the Pesach offering? That was the preparation. That was what got us out of Egypt. We had it. It says in the Haggadah also, we talk about the two bloods that the Jewish people shed that night, the night before the Exodus. The blood of the circumcision, they all circumcised that night, because in Egypt for hundreds of years they didn't circumcise themselves. So they circumcised themselves the night before they left Egypt. And the other blood was the blood of the sacrifice. So on account of these two bloods, God took us out of Egypt. Anyway, back to the matzah. Why are we confusing this, ourselves and the children, with the reason we eat the matzah? Here's a third question, which is even more bothersome. Here's the third question. You're telling me that the Jewish people left Egypt in haste and there was no time for the matzah to rise? Let me ask you something. How many Jews left Egypt? 600,000 men. Which means there were 2 million people. An equal amount of women, an equal amount of children, and so on. How long does it take to gather 2 million people to go from Goshen, where they all lived, to the city of Ramses, where they left Egypt? And that was the exit point where they left Egypt. Even if you want to tell me that Goshen to Ramses is not so far, and somehow a miracle happened that they were able to go, what we call in Hebrew, kfitzat haderech, which means that sometimes God makes a miracle and you can travel a distance of 3 days and 3 minutes. So God makes that happen sometimes for holy people. And let's say all the Jews were so holy and that miracle happened to them, that it was a very quick journey from Goshen to Ramses. But to collect together 2 million people, men, women, and children, and elders, it's quite obvious that this must have taken them more than 18 minutes. Which is the time it takes for bread to leaven, for dough to rise and leaven. So you're telling me that this magnificent exodus that took place for 2 million people happened in one such instant, less than 18 minutes? It doesn't make any sense. it must have taken more than 18 minutes. So why are you telling me that I didn't have time to rise? It took more than 18 minutes to get them out. I mean, on a regular day, if we had to today collect 2 million people to take them out on foot, you know what that would take? It would take weeks and months. It would be a project that would be weeks on end. Let's say Moshe and God made a miracle and made it happen much quicker, but not less than 18 minutes. Just to get the people together, to Ramses must have taken more than that. So that's the third question. How do you even tell me that it didn't have time to rise when it did have time to rise? It must have taken more than 18 minutes.
Can everyone please mute themselves? We have a lot of background noise.
Yes, I'd like to everyone to please mute yourselves on Zoom over there. It's very important. In order for us to understand this idea, let me take you on a journey into a Kabbalistic Hasidic concept, which will explain to us in great detail what really matzah is all about. What is it that we're eating on Pesach night? So here's an interesting question that I want to ask you. Maybe unrelated a little bit, but we'll bring it back. We'll bring it full circle. What do you eat usually for breakfast, every one of you? A sandwich. Say you eat bread, you eat eggs, you eat tuna fish, whatever it is that you eat, right? We know that in the world that we live in, there are 4 categories of creation. There is the lowest. I'll start with the lowest is which doesn't have life to it, like stones, water, the mineral, the lifeless. The second above that in the hierarchy of creation is what we would call vegetation, trees. The next one step higher, what's the third level? Third level would be the animal, the world of animals, the zoological world, which is already a much higher level creation. It's mobile, it moves around, it has feelings, it has, And then the fourth and highest is, of course, the human being. The human being is already someone that has the ability for rational comprehension, rational thinking, the ability to communicate, and so on and so forth. Those are the 4 levels of creation. Now, God created the world that we need to live. In order for us to live, we need sustenance, right? We need to eat. In order to live, we need to survive on food. But here's the interesting question. What turns out that the human being, which is the highest in the hierarchy of creation, is dependent on lower levels of creation, on food, on bread, on fish, on the animals, on the vegetation, and so on and so forth. Shouldn't it be the other way around? That for the vegetation to survive, it needs the human, the animal. For the animal to survive, it needs the higher thing above it to give it survival. But it's the other way around. The higher you are, the more you need, the lower levels. A human being needs all the lower levels for it to survive. An animal doesn't need the human being to survive. You have animals in the jungle, and it can survive very well without human beings. Why is it that we are dependent on lower level creations? Why do we need to eat bread for our sustenance? Let the bread need us for its sustenance, for its survival. Doesn't that make sense? So the pasuk, there's a verse in the portion of Akev in the book of Deuteronomy that asks this question and answers the question in the following way. It says like this: you should know that when you eat bread, it is not just by the bread that you are living, but you are living via the spark of God that is in the bread. And I'm going to quote the verse to you. It says, Kilei ala lechem levada yichya ha'adam. Not on the bread alone is man alive, living. Ki al kol moitza pi Hashem yichya ha'adam. Rather, it is by the spark of God, the godly energy that is in the bread, that gives us life. So we're not really living off the bread, we're living off the higher level godly spark, godly energy that's in the bread. And we know that every creation, everything in creation has a godly energy that gives it life, that gives it existence. It is that spark, that godliness that gives us the ability, that we are ingesting, that gives us our sustenance and our ability to live and sustain ourselves. Sounds like a beautiful answer, right? Nice. The godly spark that's in the bread, beautiful. Kabbalistic, it has all the elements, right? It's a great concept. But the obvious question is, when God created the world, He created humans too. And in the human, there's also a spark of God. There's also a godly energy that gives me, that makes us exist. So why does the human being, which already has a spark of God and godly energy in it, why does it also need the godly spark of the spark of energy, the spark of godliness, the energy that's in the bread? It's not enough the godly energy that's in me. I need to have more godly energy that's in bread. Why? So here is an interesting answer. And this is all an introduction to really capture and understand the idea of the matzah. The answer is, and this is a Kabbalistic idea, that in truth, the lower aspects and the lower creations, like vegetation, even animals, the mineral, lifeless, those that are lower than the human being, in their source, their spark of energy, their godly spark that gives them life, that sustains them and makes them exist, in their source, they are even on a higher level than the human godly energy, than the spark that's in the human. You see, there's a hierarchy in godliness as well. And we have a certain godly energy. So does the bread, so does the animal, so does the stone. It's interesting to note that the lower something is in our physical world, it's a sign that in the spiritual source, it is higher. That means like this: in this world, the human being is the highest, right? In this physical world, we're the highest creation. That means that in our source, we're the lowest. We have the lowest form of godly energy than all the other creations in this world. And that is why. And why is that? There's a whole concept. I don't want to delve too much into it, but just basically, Alter Rebbe in the Zohar and in Kabbalah, it speaks about two worlds. God first created the world of, which was a world of chaos, and there was a lot of godly energy there, and there was the lights of God did not really, there were too much energy for the vessels to contain them. I don't want to, it's a difficult concept. I'm not going to, elaborate too much on this. But the bottom line is, those energies, after a while, broke, they shattered, and they fell down to this world, into all the different creations that are in this world. And on a different occasion, I'll explain this idea of the world of chaos, the world of order, which we come from, human beings come from. All other creations come from that energy that descended and fell from the world of chaos, which is a much higher level world. Whereas the human being comes from the world of order, which is already more a lower energy, a lower godly energy. Anyway, so the bottom line is, it turns out that in the bread, the spark that's in the bread is on a higher level godly energy than the spark that's in a human. Therefore, for a human being to eat bread is a great advantage, because now it ingests, it eats, and it takes into itself a higher level of godly energy. Very nice idea. And this, by the way, explains a few things. Our sages tell us an interesting phenomenon, that a young child, when he's born, can't speak. He has no concept, doesn't understand. It takes some time to develop. When is a child physically able to recognize his father and call him dad, to utter the words dad, or in Hebrew Abba? You probably never heard this before, but this is what the sages tell us, that can only happen after a child eats grain. If a child doesn't eat grain, he will never be able to say the word Abba. He will never be able to recognize his father. And don't try it. Don't test this. Give your kids food. But that's what it says. What happened? Why is a child? What is this? What is this statement? But that's the statement means as follows: that when you eat bread, meaning grain, you're taking in a higher level energy, a higher level spiritual energy, and that spiritual energy, that higher spark, helps you develop your own rational thinking. It helps you develop your own wisdom. The child has no wisdom to recognize who his father is before he eats grain. In other words, the grain gives him the ability, that added wisdom that it needs to develop itself, to be able to recognize who his father and mother are. It's a phenomenal concept when you think about it. Now, let me ask you something. How old is it when a child starts saying dad or Abba in Hebrew, whatever in English, Tati? When does that happen for a kid? Let's say between 1 and 2, right? Somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. Does that kid who's between 1 and 2, 18 months old, understand why this person is his father and someone else is not his father? Or this person is his mother and that person is not his mother? He doesn't have this. He can't explain it. He doesn't even understand it in his own mind. He doesn't know why this is his father. He just has a recognition, what you would call today a super rational recognition. This is my father. The grain gives him that ability to recognize his father. This is true also spiritually. And this is where we come to the matzah. The matzah is literally a spiritual food. When a yid eats matzah, you know what happens? On the night of Pesach. When you eat matzah, middle of Chanukah, whatever, that's, it's kosher, it's nice, it's a very important thing, you have to make a bracha on it. But we're talking about eating matzah on Pesach. When you eat matzah on Pesach, you're ingesting a certain spiritual energy that develops your own faith. Just like that kid. When he says daddy, and he recognizes this is my father, it's more out of faith than anything else. As I said, he doesn't know why he's his father. It's more a concept of, it's a super rational thing. It's his faith. He believes, he recognizes deeply that this is his father, not knowing why. Spiritually as well, a yid, a Jew, recognizes his father, her father in heaven, as a result of eating matzah on Pesach. There's something in the matzah, a spiritual energy, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute what that is, that gives a yid the ability, strengthens his faith. That means when you're eating matzah, you're eating a spiritual energy, a godly energy that gives your neshama and your body the ability to recognize God, your Father. Why is that? What is this? What's the spiritual energy? So let me share with you what the Alter Rebbe says. And he answers with this, we'll have a perfect answer to the 3 questions that we asked before. Are you with me, by the way? Any questions? If you have a question now, unmute yourself and ask. This is the time for questions. It is Pesach, right? We're talking, it's the time for questions. Manishtana. I guess, yeah.
David, I have one question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned about the masses of Jews that lined up to exit Egypt. I read somewhere that only 20% of the Jews exited Egypt and 80% stood behind. Could you comment on that? And I do have a second question. is my understanding that the Jews were meant to stay in Egypt for 400 years, but we only stood a little over 200. So those are my two questions.
Very good question. I'm going to answer the first one now. The second one I'll answer later. The first one is, you're right, there were 10 million Jews that lived in Egypt before the Exodus, and only 2 million left. 80% died in Egypt. Does that satisfy you? That's the answer, basically.
That's the answer, and I'm not sure exactly how many came to Egypt to begin with. I
70.
think the original number was
70. Yeah.
So in 200 years, the population grew from 70 to how many million?
10 million.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a miracle, actually. If you really, I did this calculation once, and it's quite a natural phenomenon. If you do the math, if a generation's 25, 70 people, you're starting with 70 people, you're not starting with one. So 70 people, if each one has 10 children, and within 25 years, you have now 700, right?
Now the Jews that
Hold on, let me go, and you do the math. Every 25 years, you go, it's possible. I mean, it's extraordinary, but it's naturally possible for such a phenomenon to happen. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. The Jews that stood in Egypt, were they in defiance of Moses, or they felt they wanted to remain Jewish in the land of Egypt?
They were in defiance of God and Moses. They didn't believe in the Exodus, and that's what held them back. Yeah. All right, let's move on. So here's an interesting thing. It seems clear from the story of the Exodus that the Jewish people ate matzah twice. Once at their Seder that they were commanded to eat the night before they left Egypt, where they were told to bring a Paschal offering and eat that meat together with the matzah and the myrrh. Right? It's clear. In the story of the Exodus, that's very clear. They ate matzah in Egypt the night before they left Egypt. But then it's obvious that they ate matzah also when they left Egypt. When they left in haste, that whole story, the dough that they took with them didn't have time to rise, and they ate matzah again later on when they left Egypt, which happened already way after midnight the next morning and so on, right? Clear, correct? Now it's interesting that when you look in the Torah, and the Alter Rebbe points this out, that when God gives the Jewish people the mitzvah to eat matzah while they're still in Egypt, he says, Bo'erev tochlu matzos. In the evening you should eat matzahs. That word matzos is spelled mem tzadik taf. If you know some Hebrew, those are the three Hebrew letters that make up the word matzos. Mem tzadik taf. But what's interesting is that the next morning when they leave Egypt, which is way after midnight, when the whole miracle happens with the dough not being able to rise and this quick, hasty exodus, when that whole thing happens, what happens over there? What does the Torah tell us? I'm going to read it to you over here again. You can look in the Haggadah, it's right there in front of you. It says over there that they baked the dough that they took out of Egypt, matzah cakes, ugos matzos. What is the word matzah? How is the word matzah spelled in this case? With 4 letters. Mem, tzadik, vav, taf. Suddenly in this matzah is added 8 vav. Why is there a vav in this matzah? And in the matzah that they were told to eat while they're still in Egypt, it lacks a vav. This is not by chance. This is not just, there's a reason behind this. There's a very deep reason behind this. Let me share it with you. What is a vav? Anyone know what the physical picture of a vav is? It's a vertical line that goes from above down, right? It's a vertical line. That's a vav. What that represents is something that comes down from above to us. A revelation of God that begins up above, but it reveals itself in our world. In other words, it comes down from heaven, down to earth. We have this great revelation of God. He comes down to us. That's what the Vav represents. In other words, the next morning when they ate the matzah, because it couldn't leaven, they had no time, they ran out of Egypt, they rushed out. What do we read in the Haggadah? That they didn't have time because the great revelation of the King of Kings, right, was revealed to them and took them out. That means that on that morning there was this great revelation of God in the world. And because of that, the matzah that they ate, which again is a spiritual food, as I said, the matzah gives you faith. The matzah, you're ingesting a godly spark. What was the godly spark that was in the matzah of that morning, that when they left Egypt? The matzah had within it the revelation represented by that vav. That means there was this unbelievable spiritual revelation of God in the world at that time. And the matzah that they ate contained that special revelation. They were swept in what does this literally mean? They were swept out of Egypt. In other words, they were swept upwards into a godly reality, into a newfound connection to God. Whether they liked it or they didn't. It's not that they were prepared for this. They were not. It was a sudden revelation. You'll see soon that there was a little bit of a preparation. But there was this revelation of God, and that's why the Torah spells out the word matzah, which represents the revelation of God, this spark of this holiness that's in that food, with a vav, because there was some special revelation, high-level spiritual energy in that matzah that was revealed to the Jewish people in Egypt. The matzah that they ate before midnight in the Seder, in their houses in Egypt, lacked that vav. It was a different kind of matzah. It was spiritual. It had within it some kind of godliness, but not at that level at all. Now here, listen to an interesting concept. When God told Moshe, when Moses told the Jewish people to eat the matzah on the night of Pesach when they were in Egypt, together with their paschal meat, with the paschal offering, he gave them another mitzvah. He told them, make sure that the matzah you eat is guarded against any kind of leavening. He says to them the famous words, Ushmartem et hamatzot. You should guard the matzahs. Watch that it doesn't become chametz, that the flour doesn't come in contact with the water. Right? Why did he have to tell them that? Very simple, because if you don't watch it, it could become chametz. But that, my friends, was only the matzah before midnight. The matzah before midnight, we're told, was spiritual, had within it this great level of godly energy that strengthened the faith of the Jewish people. We had suddenly a recognition of God, like a little child recognizes his father after he eats grain. But it was a unsophisticated, if you will, less sophisticated connection. It was one that we didn't really grasp, understand. It was like a faith, like a little child that knows he's his father, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't understand why. It's faith. So the Jewish people were on a very spiritually impoverished state at that time. They weren't on a high level in Egypt. When they first were that night in Egypt, they were on a very low spiritual level. In fact, it says that God had to sweep them out of Egypt. Otherwise, they would be so doomed forever. They were so corrupt, their souls became so corrupt in Egypt. The Egyptians did that to them, by the way. that had God not taken them out that very moment, he would never be able to take them out because their souls would be forever lost and corrupt. They would lose it all. So it means that the Jewish people were very, very, not very spiritual. But the matzah gave them that extra energy, that gave them this recognition in God, like we just said before, that spiritual spark that's in this heart, this holiness that's in the matzah, that gave them that faith in God, that gave them the ability to say, yeah, we want to go out of Egypt together with Moses, and we're going after him blindly, no problem. But then came the matzah of the next morning. What happened the next morning? The next morning, God revealed his pure essence into the world, into the Jewish people's neshama, into their souls. And that's why we're told that the dough that they took out of Egypt did not have time to leaven. What does it mean it didn't have to? I asked you before, what do you mean it didn't have time to leaven? It did have time to leaven. It took more than 18 minutes to get the Jews out of Egypt. 2 million Jews. It was less than 18 minutes, you want to tell me? Of course it had time to leaven. But it's interesting that the words in the Torah is not that the words in the Torah are, and I'm going to read it to you again. It says like this. They baked the dough that they took out of Egypt into matzah cakes. Kiloi chametz. What does kiloi chametz mean? Because it was not chametz. Which is an interesting way to say that it was unleavened bread. Kiloi chametz means, in the words, the way our sages explain it, it's not that they watched this dough that it shouldn't be able to become chametz because it would rise after 18 minutes. Kiloi chametz means even after 18 minutes it didn't rise into chametz. That means it could have taken 18 hours and this dough would still not become chametz. It had nothing to do with the 18 minutes because clearly the Exodus took more than 18 minutes. So this dough had ample time to rise. But this type of matzah, the revelation of God that shined in the world, the essence of Hashem, that infinite essence of God that was on display in Egypt, caused this matzah not to be able to become chametz even after 18 hours. What is chametz? Do you know what chametz represents? Everyone knows, right? Chametz represents, what does it mean? It rises, it represents the human beings. When a person feels arrogant, he's puffed up by himself, he's rising in his own estimation. He feels himself above others. He's chametz, he's leavened. He's puffed up out of proportion. That's chametz. Chametz represents everything that's negative. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is referred to by the sages as the chametz, as the leavened bread, as the leavened dough. So chametz represents the negative. What is the matzah? The matzah is humility. It's flat. It doesn't rise. It's the humble person. So when we say that the matzah in the morning didn't become chametz because there was this great revelation of God in Egypt, what we're saying is that revelation caused the Jewish people to become so swept up into a spiritual reality that it's canceled out all their negativity. The Yetzer Hara went to sleep. And therefore, they could never have become themselves leavened, arrogant. They were completely humble, spiritual. They were connected to God at the highest level. And therefore, that reflected itself. You know, the spiritual world and the physical world are deeply connected. One reflects the other. So in the physical dough that the Jewish people had didn't either become chametz, didn't either leaven, didn't either rise. Not because it was less than 18 minutes. It's because God was revealed in the world. And when God is so revealed in the world, it can't become chametz. The Yetzer Hara is shut out. And when the Yetzer Hara is shut out, a human being can't become chametz, leavened, and puffed out of proportion, and arrogant. So his dough did not become arrogant. The dough remained humble, and it didn't rise. And that's what the Torah means, kiloi chametz, and we say it in the Haggadah. It didn't become chametz, even though much more time than 18 minutes passed. Because that kind of revelation makes it impossible for the human being, for the Jew, and his dough to become chametz. The dough reflects the spiritual energy of of what was going on then. That's what the bread is. Isn't that what we said? That's what matzah is. So the matzah after midnight is with the vav. You know why? Because that matzah represented a great revelation that came from above downward. So now here's the answers to our three questions. When we eat matzah, so I answered one, even though it took more than 18 minutes to get them out of Egypt, it didn't rise, because we're talking about the matzah of the morning, which is a different matzah. And by the way, that matzah doesn't have to be guarded against chametz, because it can't become chametz. You only have to guard matzah that could become chametz, right? You have to make sure it doesn't. The morning matzah, the evening matzah, they had to guard against becoming chametz. You know why? Because their spiritual state was still undeveloped. They had a little infusion of godliness through the matzah that they ate, but it lacked that spiritual energy of the vav, which meant that it was a limited energy, a limited spirituality. So they had faith in God. It introduced them to God, a recognition of God, but still one that was somewhat lacking. And therefore, it could, the Yetzer Hara can creep up on them. The evil inclination can get the better side of them. So the Torah says, watch out, that matzah shouldn't become leaven. Make sure it doesn't become chametz. Because if you don't, you're not careful, the Yetzer Hara jumps right in and can get you down. So the matzah before midnight had to be watched. But the matzah after midnight didn't have to be watched, because kiloi chametz, it couldn't become chametz. Because in that matzah there was the revelation of the Holy of Holies as he revealed himself in Egypt to get them out of Egypt. Now, what do we eat on Pesach? The matzah that we eat today. But before we get to us, let me share with you, just 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm back. So let's go back to Egypt for a minute. So they ate 2 matzahs in Egypt, one before midnight and one after midnight. In order for them to experience that great revelation of the Exodus in the morning that was represented by that extra vav and that spiritual dynamic, the Jewish people had to eat first the matzah before midnight. That matzah before midnight was the entryway for them into the spiritual reality of God. You can't just jump into the morning matzah before anything, if you have no preparation at all. So it turns out that the Jewish people were told by Moses, eat matzah before you leave Egypt. You know why? Because you need to be humbled somewhat. You need a spiritual boost. You have to recognize that God exists, and that happens when you eat bread, when you eat the matzah. Like the kid that eats grain and now he recognizes his father. We eat the matzah before midnight in Egypt to have a recognition of God, and that, now that we're already involved in somewhat of a spiritual reality, we have a concept of the spiritual of God. Now God can reveal his true essence to us and sweep us out of Egypt, get us out, and it's a whole different level of matzah. So first comes the matzah before midnight, then we have the matzah after midnight. One leads to the other. Now let's talk about 2020, when all of you will be eating matzah this Wednesday and Thursday night. Which matzah do you think we're eating? The matzah that lacks the vav, or the matzah that does not lack, that has the vav? In other words, the matzah, the higher level matzah, or the more basic level matzah? The matzah that has within it the great revelation of the King of Kings, or the matzah that the Jews ate before midnight in Egypt? Here's the answer. The matzah that we eat tonight, not tonight, the Wednesday night, at the Seder night, is the higher matzah. It has within it that incredible spiritual, infinite energy of God. That when you eat it, not only is your faith strengthened, you are in touch with the essence of God. But the question is, how is it that the Jews in Egypt, and that's why we say in the Haggadah, let's read this now. When we answer the kid, the answer, why do we eat the matzah? What do we answer him? Because Moses in Egypt told the Jews to eat matzah before midnight? No, we don't make a mention of that matzah. The matzah that we mention, and we tell him, why do we eat the matzah? Because the dough didn't have time to rise. Which matzah is that? That's the matzah of the next morning, after midnight. So even though we eat our matzah before midnight, we are eating the spiritual energy of the matzah that we have reflects and is really it represents the matzah of the higher level that the Jews ate the next morning. And that's why we would spell matzahs with a vav. We quote that verse that talks about the matzah that the Jews ate in the morning, not the matzah that the Jews ate in the evening. How do we go straight to the matzah of the morning without the preparation of the matzah of the evening? They needed the preparation, right? The first matzah, then they can have the second matzah. We go straight to the higher matzah. How do we do that? Very simple. The Jews in Egypt were before the Torah was given. The Torah wasn't given yet. So how do you expect them to have a connection, to fall right in to the laps of the essence of God? That they're not spiritual at all. They have no preparation at all. You got to prepare them for something like that. So Moshe tells them, eat the night before, eat matzah, the lower level matzah. Get some recognition of God, like a kid gets a recognition of his father. There's a spiritual energy, that spark that's in the matzah. Eat the so that the next morning you can really experience God and experience a magnificent, powerful exodus, where you leave all the negativity behind and you become a real free person. We don't need to wait till the next morning for that. You know why? Because today and yesterday and the day before, our whole life we've been doing mitzvahs. We got the Torah many, many years ago, so we have the advantage, the luxury of tremendous connection to God's spirituality and holiness throughout the year. You're right, we don't have a connection to that kind of revelation that is revealed once a year on Pesach. The great revelation of God to take us out of Egypt that the Jews experienced that morning when they left Egypt. For that we need to wait for Pesach. But we don't need to wait for the morning. We do it, the minute Pesach comes in, we're already prepared through all the Torah and all the mitzvahs we've learned and done throughout the year. Now we are open, we're able to contain and to ingest and to absorb and become connected with that ultimate essence of Hashem that was revealed at the Exodus. So which matzah do we eat the night of Pesach? The higher matzah. We go straight to that matzah. We don't need two matzahs. We go straight to the higher one. And that's why we tell the child, this matzah that we eat is not because of the matzah the Jews ate the night of Pesach before midnight in Egypt. We don't need that preparation. We have the matzah that the Jewish people ate the next morning, that didn't have time, that didn't leaven, because it couldn't leaven when you have such a revelation of God. Any questions? So you should know what you're eating on matzah night, on Pesach night. Every time you chew that matzah, when you make the bracha, that's why it's important to eat shmura matzah that night. I know a lot of people tell me, well, it doesn't taste good, it's hard to chew, it's not the best matzah, I must tell you, you're probably right. It's probably not the tastiest matzah, although I like that matzah. So it's a matter of taste, But even if it doesn't taste that well to your buds, to your taste buds, take an ounce of that matzah this Wednesday and Thursday night, at least 1 ounce. Make the bracha al achilas matzah. Think about what matzah represents. You're eating faith. You're ingesting a spark of God, a godly energy that's going to strengthen your faith in God. And who doesn't need to strengthen our faith right now with everything that's going on in the world that threw us into turmoil like this? We need to have strength in our faith. The strengthening of the faith happens when you eat the Shmura Matzah. But I want to share with you some other thing, another interesting insight, which the Zohar teaches us, and that is that the matzah, when you eat the matzah on Pesach, it's not only the food of faith, but it's also the food, in the words of the Zohar, the food of healing. It literally gives your body a healing of the soul, of course, but also a healing of the body. I remember hearing stories. Yesterday was the Rebbe's birthday, so I'll share, I'll share something from the Rebbe with you. Many times, when people would come to the Rebbe for a blessing, there was someone sick in the family, someone sick, a neighbor, a friend, as they came to the Rebbe to ask for, we're talking about real health problems. And the Rebbe would tell them, he would give them a piece of matzah and tell them to crumb it up and push some of that matzah into the mouth of this sick person. And he said, because in the matzah there's a power of healing. It's called a food of faith. The Rebbe, this was no joke. The Zohar says it, it's true. And the Rebbe actually used it as a means to heal a person. Of course, the Rebbe was coming from a different world, from a different place. I mean, he had that ability to utilize matzah in that way. Of course, he was a tzaddik, and he was able to bring about such a blessing for that person. But he used the matzah. He took the Zohar's words very seriously. So eat matzah this week. Not just regular matzah that you buy, the Yehuda matzah. Eat that too if you have that, but on the Seder night, at least, eat Shmura matzah, these special guarded matzah. There's one more question that I want to answer to you, and it's probably a question all of you should have asked. That is, if indeed the matzah that we're eating on Pesach night at our Seder is the matzah, reflects the matzah of the morning, which has in it the Vav, right, the spiritual energy of the essence of Hashem, which doesn't need to be guarded because it cannot become chametz. So why do we need to guard our matzah against it becoming chametz? It's matzah that can't become chametz, right? It has that, what God has revealed within that matzah. So the thing is, the basic answer to that is, now maybe at a different time I'll elaborate more on this. Got to leave you with something to wonder, right? But basically, because we have our spiritual sensitivities have been dulled through exile and through sin. And because of that, even though you're right, the matzah that we are eating is the same exact matzah that the Jews ate in the morning, with regard to which the Torah says, Ki lo chametz, it cannot become chametz even if 18 hours passes. Our dough would become chametz if we left it 18 minutes in contact with water. That's because spiritually our senses have been dulled through sin, through exile. So even though God is revealing to us the same revelation that He did when the Jews left Egypt, we still have to guard why our matzah has it really has a dual job, a dual aspect, a double aspect to it. It reflects both matzahs. It reflects the matzah that still needs to be guarded, reflecting ourselves. Our Yetzer Hara is not completely cancelled out yet. It's been dulled. Our sensitivity to spirituality has been compromised through exile and through sin. But don't make a mistake thinking that it's compromised matzah. It's not. The matzah itself represents and contains within it the highest essence of Hashem, that when we eat it, we are in touch with Hashem Himself, and we are ingesting that, and it strengthens our faith, and not only our faith, but it allows for our faith to be internalized in our minds and our hearts. To understand, to feel, and that's what Pesach is, and that's what liberates us. That's what liberation means. That our neshamas and our body on every level, psychologically, spiritually, physically, are in sync. Our hearts feel what our neshama feels. Our minds perceive what our neshama perceives. That's a true free person. But a person who's conflicted, his soul is pulling in one way, and his mind and heart are pulling in another way. That's a troubled Jew. That's a troubled human being. That's the ultimate enslavement, where you cannot make up your mind. You don't know where you are. We spoke about that last week. So eat matzah, ingest matzah, enjoy the matzah. That's why the last thing we eat on the Seder night is the afikomen, right? Because we want to make sure that the last thing left in our mouth, the taste, is the matzah, right? What we want to do is take this higher level energy that's super rational, that's faith-based, that is essence of Hashem, and allow it to sink into our taste buds. That it should taste good to us. Taste good means that we feel it, we enjoy it, our heart is fully involved, our mind is fully, we perceive that this is the right thing for us. We feel that this is the right thing for us. We don't just do it based on faith itself, faith alone. That's the immature matzah. That's the matzah before midnight. It's faith-based. The matzah post-midnight, the next morning, the matzah with the vav, is a matzah that it contains within it a richness. Yes, a transcendent level of God, and we have faith. This course is faith-based, but we internalize that faith. We eat the afikomen. We want that taste of the matzah. The faith should be in our heart and mind, in our taste buds. It should taste good to us. So to integrate what we believe into our hearts and our minds. And if we would be able to eat matzah like that on every Pesach night, and teach our children to eat matzah like that, would that be a Seder? So yes, the matzah we eat tonight, on Wednesday night, is the matzah that the Jews ate the next morning. They needed a preparation of the matzah before midnight. We don't need it, because we have Torah and mitzvahs all year round to prepare us. So we go straight to the higher level. And the job is to integrate it into our minds and hearts, so that we're entirely godly on every level. That's true freedom. And with that, I say good night. And if you have any questions now, of course, anyone is welcome to ask. I want to thank all of you that watched on Zoom and all of you that watched on Facebook. I wish you all a happy and kosher Pesach. You should all be well. And hopefully by this Pesach already, we should be in Jerusalem together with Mashiach. You can unmute yourself and ask any question.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
thank you very much. It's very informative. It's Linda Butchner.
I know.
Thank you again, and a happy and Pesach to your family and to everyone.
Aziz and Pesach to you too, and to everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Wonderful class.
Who's that?
It's Vicky.
Oh, Vicky, hi.
How to get matzah to our sick mom.
I gotta get it to you. How do I get you shmura matzah?
We have our own shmir matzah. How do we get it to our sick
You have the
mom?
round matzah? You have the round handmade matzah? Oh, good.
Yes,
Okay, good.
Yeah, how do we get it to our sick mothers in the hospital?
Where in the hospital?
You know, Mark's mom has COVID.
I didn't know that. I knew she had COVID. I didn't know she was in the hospital.
The Memorial East.
Oh boy.
You don't even know what to do.
Who's the doctor?
I'm gonna call tomorrow and find out if there's any way we could get her even a small piece of matzah. She needs it. We all need it right now.
You gotta ask. You're gonna have to find out if that's a possibility. If they'll even give it to her. Is she conscious?
She's conscious.
Very conscious.
She's very conscious. Thank God.
Anyway, we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay.
Anyone else? If you don't have shmura matzah, please let me know by tomorrow because I want to make sure you get a box. But if you have already, that's good. Good night, everyone. Huh? Go ahead.
Question.
Yeah.
What about the candles? How are we gonna do in Shabbat? Candles.
You light the Shabbos candles before Shabbos. Okay, you light Shabbos candles this week. Yontif candles on Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night before Shabbos begins. You light Shabbos candles. Of course.
Before Shabbos, we light.
Because on the holiday, you're allowed to light candles. So you do it right before Shabbos.
We have a candle on Wednesday and a candle on Thursday.
Thursday and Friday, 3 times in a row. It's a very powerful thing.
We light every day. We light the candles.
Yeah, at least 2 candles each time. Like the women light, like every Friday night, the women light the Shabbos candles. This Friday night also, the women, Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night, the women light at least, or the amount of candles they light every Friday night, they should light 3 times this week. Good night, everyone. Thank you. Any other questions? Quickly? You do?
No, good night, everybody.
Good night, good night. Oh, Doran, ma nishma? Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. All the best. Okay, everyone. Sei gesund. I'm going to end the meeting now, so all the best to everyone. Good night. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Bye.
Everyone watching, good night. Yasher Koyach. Be well. Have a special a happy holiday, a happy Pesach, and enjoy it very much. I know a lot of you are going to be alone this Pesach. It'll be a little challenging to make a Seder all by yourself, but God would never give us a challenge that we cannot fulfill and do. So obviously we have the power and the ability to do it. So rise to the challenge and do what we have to, and let's make Pesach the best Pesach yet. Look, there's something special about being, you have it, you'll be by yourself, you'll have time to focus on making a Seder a little longer and having more time with your family. Look, there's always something good and everything not good, right? So utilize the reality that we find ourselves in and find the best part of it and do it. This is our holiday. No one else is going to do it for us. So Wednesday night, become free. Experience freedom. Thank you so much again for watching. All the best to everyone. Yisrolikul, a guten Yom Tov. I see that you made some comments. Nice to see you. Okay. It was a pleasure, and be well.